This is a good one. Now, that is one hell of an actress. She actually makes you believe she enjoys being on both those podcasts at the same time, even though simple math and biology tells you that it has to be hurting her, maybe even causing permanent internal damage.
Welcome to the Summer of Hellspawn.
We gotta add a thing in.
I'm working on the music. Don't worry. There's going to be a new. Hopefully, you will have heard a brand new Summer of Hellspawn theme song that I've been working on.
Oh boy, I didn't feel good doing that, George.
No one should, because this whole. Okay, so look. This is hard to get into. First off,
who are you? What are we doing?
Yeah, my name's George Marston. Pronouns they, them, or she, her. With me, as always, is my Pierce. That's exactly right.
Pierce Leiden, pronouns they, them, and this is Spawnography.
This is Spawnography, and we are embarking on the first episode of our Summer of Hellspawn. If you've been listening along, you know that we're getting into the first two issues of the side series Hellspawn, which is written by Brian Michael Bendis, drawn by Ashley Wood and others, and we'll get into that. So it's a totally different perspective on Spawn. Before we get into the beginning, I'll just say I'm reading from the Hellspawn Complete Collection, which just came out in March of this year. So it should be available at your local shop if you haven't already picked it up.
Yeah, it should be pretty easy to get a hold of. I have heard from a couple listeners that the thing that's been tough to get a hold of is Compendium 2. One eagle-eared listener mentioned that it might be because Angela shows up in it more. That it
Maybe
is more
so.
Popular, but it's a pretty good.
It's a good compendium.
Fury.
I mean, we wrapped it up. It's because our listenership spiked.
Yeah. It's because of Spawnography, you can't find Compendium 2.
That's probably
That's
true.
what I'd like to believe, anyway.
I'd like to believe anything you tell me, Pierce.
Well, I did tell you that we were going to cover this, and it's a rough start.
Yeah,
So we're gonna open this with, if you do decide to pick up this book, heavy trigger warnings for basically all of the darkest shit imaginable.
Self-harm, sexual assault, things like that. If those things bother you, we totally get it. We're not going to dwell on the details of them, but those topics will come up.
Yeah, they will be mentioned because we kind of have to. We don't really have to totally mention them, but we
don't have to dig in, but
we don't have to dig into it, but they will be mentioned because they are things that happen in the comic, and we're going to be doing our jobs. Right. Because I brought this on us. So
you brought this on us. Well, okay. So look, before we get into talking about this, it's only been a couple of days since we recorded, actually, for once. Did you get into anything cool over the last couple of days?
Yeah. No, nothing too crazy. I've just been continuing to enjoy the Final Fantasy Magic the Gathering set. It's really, really fun.
Nice.
I built a bunch of decks so far on Arena. And so many cool little characters, having a good time with it. Trying to think. Work's been work, but I helped somebody in Chicago get 2,000 custom-made popsicles.
Wow.
From California.
That's cool, I guess. Yeah.
So that's something.
Popsicles are good. I like them.
Yeah.
Ice lollies, as my colleagues across the pond would call them.
Really?
Yeah.
That's a thing?
That's what they call them.
I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, why wouldn't it?
How about you? You getting anything?
Well, the best thing I've done since we talked is I published an article I was really proud of. It hasn't gotten a lot of attention, as sometimes happens, but basically, and this is going to be a little ironic for listeners of our podcast, maybe not so much coming from me, but the premise of it is about Superman and about Superman's power levels and about how fans should just stop asking about Superman's power levels and talking about power levels as a definitive thing instead of the mythos of a character and the concept and traits that make up who that character is and the stories that they're in.
One of the things that I dislike about like modern fandom, and it's not that new, because I think that the power levels thing is definitely a trading cards side effect.
Yeah, well, I think it's been around as long as superheroes have been around, right? Like, I grew up, like I said this in the article I wrote, which you can read on totalfilm.com, whose opinions are actually not reflected in this podcast, except for the little bit of the part of my opinion that was published on the site that I'm talking about now. Just the part of what I'm talking about that was published, that somewhat reflects opinions that are on the site. Other than those things, though, anything else I say, not reflective of any opinion of anybody's opinion. It's not.
We got it.
Legal disclaimer.
Got it. Yeah. No.
Yeah.
That's binding.
It's legally binding.
Yeah.
I'm cutting and printing that. So yeah, like I said in the article, I've always read comics, and as a kid when I was in the comic shops, you're haunting the stacks and you're talking to the other fans about like, oh, could this guy lift Thor's hammer? Who's stronger than Superman? It's a common conversation, but I think the important thing is, and the point that I use to wrap up my finely written piece of opinion writing is that that's what makes those questions so special, is that every fan gets to answer it. Every fan gets to read the stories, have their own opinion, have the moments that really stand out to them as definitive of what these characters can do, and it lives and dies by the telling.
So the reason I don't really like those conversations, even though they have been around since the dawn of superheroes, is that fans frequently, not everybody is super comprehensive on every single book, right? On every single character. They think that they probably are, but they're probably not. They're probably forgetting something, which is fine. These characters have been around for 50, 60, 70 years in some cases. But they forget that these characters are not like objective. Like the things that happen in stories are not objective. Correct. They are subjective. They need to happen the way they happened for
their works of art.
Yeah, for the story to happen. So like, yeah, Captain America can lift the hammer because it shows us something about his character.
Right.
Like even when he just moves it in Age of Ultron, right? When we get that paid off like two movies later, it's a huge moment because stories. When Storm loses her powers and like right before life death and like eventually gets them back, like these things are not meant to be like, well, that's, my dad could beat up your dad in a fight.
There is a generation of tire kicking factotum fans who have taken the clout that comes with knowing facts and details and story moments in conversation with other fans to a level of currency that is unheard of and unnecessary, where people are just, it kind of relates to what I've said before about sometimes, not always, this podcast being a great example of the exception to the not rule but thought I'm about to say, which is it's not always best to only read from the start of a comic.
Yeah.
If you want to read Fantastic Four, you go back to Fantastic Four #1 from 1961. You're going to be like, what the fuck am I reading? If you don't have a lexicon for that.
Yeah.
And you won't necessarily get the same things. You won't feel like, oh, the Fantastic Four is pushing boundaries of comic storytelling that we haven't seen before, which it did at the time.
Right.
Spawn, I think, is a great example of a comic that is fun and easy to read from issue 1 because, one, there's only a 300 issue span in there. It's only, 30, 40, 35 years.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to literally 60, 70, 80, 90 years of some of these characters that are wildly disjointed. Spawn is at least an attempt at that one long narrative that is meant to be read like you can pick it up at any point you want to, whatever's contemporary to you, but you'll get a lot out of it from reading it from one. Not every comic is like that.
But I think, it's interesting to say like, oh, it's only been around like 30 years, 35, right? But like, if you think about it, when Spawn came out, that's how long Spider-Man had been around.
Exactly.
And I think that that's a really interesting comparison. I'll keep going back to our interview with Todd and how he kind of said, I found it really fascinating that he really was like, oh, I wish I had more Doctor Dooms. I wish I had more of these like big players, because you compare it to those first 100 issues of Spider-Man, and Spider-Man is clearly there's a lot of like spaghetti, like we're just throwing things at the wall.
Well,
but
the big difference, and maybe you're getting to this, is that
I think you're about to say what I'm going to say, but go.
Spider-Man in 1962 onwards was written from the perspective of, well, someone's going to read this and throw it in the trash. That was how comics were read and written at the time. And part of the lore around the Marvel universe is they wanted to change some of that and have stories that felt like they meant more. But comics weren't thinking about, oh, what's going to be going on in Fantastic Four number 800?
Right. It's disposable entertainment. It's disposable entertainment. It's not continuity is not a thing that they were planning on building. It's just a thing that it's a byproduct of just serialized storytelling.
Spawn wasn't written with the like, oh, I've got a 300 issue arc in mind, right, but it was written in the light of a world where those comics already existed. Comics where a Spider-Man had already been going for 30 years. And right, the version of that kind of storytelling at the time was episodic. It was, you see Peter Parker this week and he's fighting the Vulture. You see him next week and he's fighting Dr. Octopus. You see him. And that kind of feels how Spawn started a little bit with those weekly characters. But like you said, Todd said there weren't as many Dr. Dooms, Green Goblins, maybe, big recurring villains. So we've kind of gone on like a tangent of a tangent of a tangent of this.
That's okay. My other thing too that I think it just kind of, you almost said what I was going to say, but the other thing I was going to say is that 30 years into Spider-Man, Spider-Man's supporting cast is the entire Marvel universe, right? Yes. So it's much different to look. It's hard to compare those two things because it is not. Yes, Spawn is a bunch of different creators who are kind of dipping their toes into the waters, and we saw that with the Coco Swiss, and we saw that with various spin-off series and things like that. But a lot of it, even to this day, it's still like from the mind of Todd McFarlane, right? He's still so involved that there's a benefit to reading it from the beginning because you do get to see like how his priorities change. You get to see how he wants to like modernize the book to kind of match up more with people's expectations. That is something I tried to kind of ask him, was like, is the current era of Spawn something that you're being like really intentional about, where it does read a little bit more like a Marvel or DC book in so many ways? And, he was quick to be like, well, I don't really care if it's like those, which that's the brand. I totally get it. But it's interesting I'm having a fascinating time really parsing what the added layers that books like Hellspawn, what they do to sort of morph the main narrative that we're following in the main Spawn title.
Well, two things to say about that. One is, we could theoretically, and we aren't necessarily doing this, but we could read feasibly every appearance of Spawn. Not just every Spawn comic, but every appearance of Spawn. We could get our hands on it pretty easily. Mm-hmm. We could track it down, figure out what order it's in. Hell, I have most of the Spawn comics that have been published up to the point we're reading either in collection or hard copy at this point.
Yeah.
Good luck doing that with Spider-Man.
Right, exactly.
You know what I mean? Like, if you want to be Spider-Man's #1 fan, God bless. I think you don't even necessarily need to read comics to be that person.
Yeah.
But if you want to be that, there are people who have that, like, what's the reading order if I want to read every Spider-Man appearance?
Right.
Well, I don't fucking know, dude. Probably nobody does. There's probably someone out there. There's probably a wiki guide that's almost there. But
There
Like,
are a bunch of like reading orders out there, but like because new
but
stuff
good
gets
luck
published
tracking
all the
some of
time.
that shit down.
Yeah.
Because some of it was published decades ago with no intention of ever being read again.
And now we're seeing a lot more, especially at Marvel, we're seeing a lot more legacy creators working back during their original eras. So we have like the Wolverine and Kitty Pryde mini that like Chris Claremont's like, yeah, it's 1985 again, and
Right.
and you are here, and we're kind of like backfilling continuity at this point. So, which we do less of, I feel, with Spawn. Although Curse of Shirley Johnson and the new Dark Ages Spawn,
Spawn has some retroactive continuity in that
totally.
way. I mean, all the way back to the beginning with the medieval Spawn, but that's more of a side story thing. And the other thing I was going to say is, the other point I was going to make is, to bring it back around to what started this conversation about, tire kicking factotum fans. Spawn is a very interesting and cool exercise, and a great example, if you read it from the first issue, of how even an individual creator's concept of an individual character's powers will evolve over the course of just a matter of issues.
Right.
Just a matter of issues, just because it needs to, or because there is an inconsistency. We see stuff in the letters columns in so many of the back matter issues that we read that are like, Spawn could do this here and he couldn't do this here, and the meter appeared here and it didn't appear here. And we've even had those conversations between us on the show. But what's interesting about it to me is, when you look at it from that mythic, fableized context, it really is, it always comes down to the fact that a fictional character is as strong, quote unquote, or as powerful or smart or whatever as they need to be for that story to get where it needs to go, and for us to feel like we're learning something and getting something meaningful out of the character. It's one of the big comparisons that I'll make is the Labors of Hercules.
Oh yeah,
that's a huge influence on, say, All-Star Superman. Those stories go back thousands of years, and they change by the telling, and that's kind of what's interesting and cool about it.
Yeah, agreed. Well, I think that this is a decent amount of table setting that we've done here.
Yeah, we kind of just talked a lot of shit, really. But now we're going to get into Hellspawn, which this is a very interesting comic. We are going to get into the credits momentarily, and certainly we're going to dig into the story. But first off, Pierce, just, had you read any of Hellspawn before? Have you read much of, what's your history with Brian Bendis at this point?
Okay, so Brian Michael Bendis, for folks who don't know, pretty, like, at this point, legendary Marvel Comics writer. Specifically, he's done some DC work.
Yeah, Superman.
But I would say, if we're gonna go for what he's remembered for, it's Ultimate Spider-Man, mainly. He's from Cleveland, Ohio. He used to draw more, and he got to start really doing like crime and noir comics when he moved into superheroes.
Jinx, aka Goldfish, were his like big break-in like indie comics.
Right, and I guess Powers is a few years after. That's actually a little bit after this, even. I think it starts like 2003 or 2004.
And he would, of course, go on to kind of shepherd the Avengers comic franchise for almost a decade, through the era of the movie.
Yep.
And really become a definitive Avengers writer for a certain era.
Yeah, the thing that he's also like pretty notable for is,
Daredevil.
I would say, changing the sort of pattern of comics writing.
Yes.
He is clearly a David Mamet fan, Aaron Sorkin, like that kind of like tippy-tappy walk and talk. Like he has very talky comics. He likes his characters to be making fun little references. He does it in a very quick-witted kind. All of his characters are like have a line. They're always like quick with a line.
Look at the opening of this comic. You know what? That's a perfect segue to get into it. These are some early Brian Bendis comics, and what we're going to be seeing here is a certain type of comic take form that was not really happening a lot at that time. It was kind of a new sort of vibe.
Yeah.
And these are Vibes comics.
truly the most vibes comics ever, and the vibe is bad in the story. But let me hit you with those credits.
Yes, Pierce, hit me with those credits.
So this is Todd McFarlane. Image Comics present Hellspawn #1, The Clown, Part 1, dedicated to Paula and Maxim Wood. I have to imagine those are Ashley Wood's parents.
Yeah, probably so.
Story by Brian Michael Bendis. Illustration and cover by Ashley Wood. Lettering by Richard Sargings. And comic crafts, Oscar Gongora. That's it. There's 4 people working on this book, which is really interesting. Especially from the art style, which we'll get into.
I like that Hellspawn here has some of the covers in the trade, I will say.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that's different from the compendiums. Not every cover is in here, but most of them, actually, no, I think most of them are, which I really like. I like that touch because those are some of the best pieces of Spawn art that Ashley Wood does. I want to go ahead and say right off the bat, we talked about this a little bit before opening. I want to say first, I don't hate these comics. There are things I really like about these comics. They are probably my least favorite kind of comics in the world.
Okay. What do you mean by that?
Well, here's why. There is a lot of text. The art is very striking, but there is so little storytelling going on that it is very hard to engage with. Between Brian Bendis's essentially caption-free, dialogue-driven, and dialogue-heavy script, and Ashley Wood's very conceptual, dreamlike art, it's very Dave McKean throughout.
Yeah.
Very Bill Sienkiewicz. 2 great names I'm comparing this to. I mean, it's beautifully rendered, but it does not tell much of a story.
It's interesting because Bendis tends to work with artists like this quite a bit. We'll see him with Alex Maleev on Daredevil, who Maleev can tighten it up and give you pretty traditional superhero stuff when he wants to, but you can tell when he's like, I kind of got an idea. I'm going to do some weird thing. A weird layout, a photo reference thing. This also feels like a little bit of precursor to Jonathan Hickman's early work on like the Nightly News, which was a lot of like collage and sort of like almost found art more than it was like pencils and inks. This is a huge departure from what we're used to in the main Spawn title. And,
only in terms of how it's done.
Right. What I mean is that it is fully like if there's like a pendulum of like vibes versus like narrative. Not that this has no narrative, but it swung so hard in the vibes category that like you're sometimes not actually sure what you're looking at.
It's almost like going from like a very strong narrative driven action movie to Eraserhead. Like this has real David Lynchy kind of vibes where it's just people, the story's being told more through dialogue, feelings, people talking. The characters are built through kind of only what we see of them. There's not a lot of necessarily, it's very dreamlike.
Yeah.
It's very dreamlike. I don't want that to sound like I'm saying that David Lynch doesn't have great characters, because he does.
Oh yeah. But you're correct in that if you watch Eraserhead's a great pull because it is so similar, right? It's a lot of like sound and image, but not necessarily 2 things that you are meant to view together, right? There's a lot here where there's like dialogue on a page of like, the first page is a great example of this.
Yes,
right?
The first page, it is Clown's new face, sort of, rendered in an incredibly abstract way. His teeth are like kind of all jagged and visible. He's got horns, or maybe it's hair. It also kind of is very fluid. And the dialogue on the page is attributed, it's a straight up script. It is a name, what that person's saying, the other person's name, what that person's saying. Hurts. Oh, please just pass the Fassbender. What I'm telling you, young sir, is that none other than Genghis Khan walks the earth. Hertz. What? Like how? Fassbender. Yes. Hertz. The dude from Star Trek. Fassbender. You mock me. Hertz. 'S a joke. Fassbender. I invite you into the little part of the world that is mine, my home in this world, and you mock me like this. Hertz. Dude, joking. I know who Genghis Khan was. And that is most of how this comic feels.
Yeah.
There are some images here where
we get to learn who Hertz and Fassbender are.
They're night people, I think.
Yep, they're night people. They're hovering over a like trash can on fire, keeping themselves warm and having this conversation. And it's interesting because this comic comes out in August of 2000. So we are fully like in the 2000s. I forget exactly what month 100 comes out in, but like
Right.
we're in this sort of like post 100 era of Spawn. Things have gotten darker in general. I would say like Spawn, the book is not as much not that it was ever happy go lucky, but it was a pretty straightforward superhero comic at a lot of points. This comic kind of throws all of that away.
It's straight up a horror comic.
Yeah, it's like let's show you the dark underbelly. In a way, I actually think, and we've seen Holguin and Todd McFarlane do this already. I think this kind of does what they're going for in that book better because, like, and actually, weirdly, because of Ashley Wood's mixed media approach, it does look a little bit more like Spawn Simony.
It does. And the thing is, so like I said, this is my least favorite kind of comic, but I don't hate this comic. And part of the reason why is that even though it's my least favorite kind, that drives me to dig deeper for things that I really like about it and things that really stand out to me. Really love the 4-panel sequence of Fassbender and Hertz standing over the barrel, like you said. Most of the page is just a wall of dialogue about Fassbender explaining that he believes Genghis Khan sold his soul to the devil and that the devil has used his spirit ever since, essentially presenting this idea that Fassbender, whoever he is, believes that Spawn is possessed by the spirit of Genghis Khan, or just the spirit of Genghis Khan, or Genghis Khan was a Hellspawn.
Yeah,
or
both of these comics are interested in a thing that I've been curious to find out. I've said this in past episodes, like, what do the people in the world of the comic think of Spawn? Right? We get to see a little bit of that with The Town Called Malice. We get to see but obviously that story doesn't take place in New York City because it would be like devastating in a way that would force that comic to have to reckon with, like anytime the big superhero nonsense happens in the middle of New York City, like you get a damage control book. I'm not saying that this is like a nitty gritty, like what's Phil Urich doing type of like Marvel's book, but this is a little bit more focused on like what's the effect that Spawn has on the world that he's in, right? If he's flitting around rooftops with a giant cape made of chains and he looks like a demon, what does that mean for like everyday people? And I do really appreciate that. I love this little 4-panel sequence. I think it's really good. I like when Ashley Wood's actually drawing comics and not just illustrating, if that makes sense.
Little bits of like comic panels in here,
I think they're all great.
They're great. So yeah, the drawing of Spawn on the next page, or rendering of Spawn with like a skull face, is pretty cool. It's hard to describe this. It's very abstract.
Yeah.
I honestly recommend visually following along with this one even more than maybe a traditional issue, because there's a lot that we're not going to be able to communicate because it's not communicated in concrete terms.
And a big reason for that is the reason that we have panels in comics typically is to show passage of time. So it's tough when you just get these sort of like static images where you're supposed to infer a lot of time passing. Right. A great example is this kind of like after this splash of Spawn, we get actually some pretty good little bits of storytelling here. But
I don't understand the sequence much at all. That said, I kind of like the art. It looks very Dave McKean to me, like the colors in particular.
yeah,
I like the lyrics of the poem here. It honestly seems like later like AFI lyrics.
she's like she's at this coffee shop and she's writing a poem. Like that's all it is.
Black
And
champagne, gasoline puddles, nightclubs dripping with neon signs. Like it's pretty good.
yeah.
You know, if you were a kid in the 90s or probably now, you probably have done this.
What's kind of fun about it too is that you have to. It takes you a second to infer that she's been writing all the. You know, like it has this. Yeah, it's this like dreamlike element that I like. How she's like scratching things out and changing things, and it's good. I think it's really fun. Now, is it kind of the same image of this girl like repeated, like kind of 8 times? Sure, it doesn't matter. It's fine. She does also notably look very much like Death.
Yes. Also, the adding to the Dave McKean kind of vibes. And
Yeah.
speaking of Death, who should show up but Clown? Now, we know it's Clown now. It's hard to know that in this moment because all we see is the tops of his eyes with like kind of a weird carved clown face.
Yeah.
And he interrupts this girl, Corey, and he says, "What are you writing?" I say, "What are you writing?" There's this very like, okay, what's the word for someone who's like a weeb for Tool?
A Tool fan.
Okay, well that was me in the 90s. But more than that, like where you're into the lore and shit. Oh, they're called Sleep Token fans now. But if you were into that, you probably watched a lot of their videos over and over, and there's that kind of quality here to me, or like a 9 Inch Nails like Closer video, the credit sequence of 7. It all kind of looks like that, kind of like that lo-fi terror vibe.
The Fincher of it all definitely exists here. It's there's really no denying it. And again, it does kind of harken back to what Todd has said he wants Spawn to be as a motion picture, in the sense that it is like Spawn kind of in the background of a bunch of stuff happening. Now, we don't get cops really the same way that we get them in his kind of vision, where it'd almost be more of a Sam and Twitch type thing. But and also notably, Brian Michael Bendis was writing Sam and Twitch. So like this is coming off of a bunch of issues of Sam and Twitch. I know we haven't covered Sam and Twitch, listeners. Nobody demanded it of us, so we didn't do it. But we do miss them.
Maybe we will. Maybe we'll do the Summer of Sam and Twitch next year.
Yeah, maybe. It's more it's more issues.
We'll see.
But
so Corey's mom gets home. There's this sequence of her getting home, blood stains all over the stairs. This page here, I keep comparing this to other artists, and in some ways it's because this art is in conversation with a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
There is a lot of like that late 80s, mid 90s, like Dave McKean, hard, like goth weirdness.
It's also doing like a little bit of like the Roy Lichtenstein riff with this like close up on the eye.
What I was going to say here though is parts of this really look like Tula Lotte's art. And you could really see where she maybe got some influence off Ashley Wood. Would make sense. I believe they're both Australian. I'm not positive Tula Lotte is Australian. I know Ashley Wood is, but
yeah, I don't know. Tula Lotte's art is great.
Yes. English. Okay. So I was close.
Yeah, it does really. Now that I'm pulling up some of her, it's because her work feels like very heavily photo referenced, but it also has this like dreamlike quality where she's just adding layers and layers and layers onto things.
And
like
it's
double
great.
Exposures and
there's some
stuff.
Mitch Jareds in this panel of this 9-panel grid here. Did I say Jareds? I think I said Garreds.
Is it Jareds or Garreds?
It's probably Garreds. I think you're right.
Come on the pod, Mitch.
Hey,
tell us how to pronounce your name.
Did you see that they announced that Tom King is show running his own Mr. Miracle animated adaptation of his own comic?
That sounds fun. Give me a Vision one, Marvel.
All right.
I would watch that.
Yeah.
I'm all for my brother does not really like animation because he's like, I'm an adult, I watch normal things. And but he watched like X-Men 97. He's like, I cried like a baby at the end of
You
it.
should watch Fist of the North Star.
Oh, Fist of the North Star fucking rules. Early
yeah,
recommendation for this episode, Fist of the North
Fist of the
Star.
North Star.
Shit's
Do
rad.
you want to see the most gonzo anime fights of all time? You know how they say Dragon Ball Z is like the slowest anime fights in the world?
Mhm.
Fist of the North Star is the fastest.
Yeah, it's like, I'm going to punch a hole right through you. Let's go.
It's literally I going and like punching a million times. It's sick. It rules.
Anyway, Ashley Wood's art, this sequence, pretty sad sequence. Again, we put a heavy trigger warning at the beginning. We're going to mention it here, but the mom comes home. She's looking for Corey. She finds Corey.
Corey is just self-harmed.
Yeah.
The blood is Corey's. And she seems to still be here with us, but she kind of is fading in her mother's presence, it seems. And the blood that is kind of the mascara running down Corey's face that turns into like the blood on her arms, that turns into the roots that are like kind of all around
Pretty cool.
Spawn. When I said there's no storytelling here, there is storytelling. This is just two dudes working to cultivate a vibe, not to tell a concrete story. When I was sitting in, okay, I told you this at the beginning before we started talking about this, and I'll just lighten the mood a little bit, because what seems to be happening here is that Corey, who is writing her dark, goth, tortured poetry, has been edged over the edge to self-harm by the presence of Clown. I'll lighten the mood off that by telling you, when I was reading this comic, I was sitting in my living room with my roommate. We were both reading comics together. A cool thing to do with friends. And he was laughing so hard because every time I turned the page, I was like, ah, Jesus Christ. Because it was just another page of like abstract stuff that like really was like having to really dig into. And he was reading Death of Superman, which is a very like interesting and fun and like just superhero comic.
Big and bright, even though, you know, it's a little dark, but overall,
Yeah.
Louis Simonson,
Yeah.
Dan Jurgens.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I really like is that, you know, the next page after this has happened, and we don't really get to find out what happens to Corey, but seemingly she passes out. We're not really told more, but
Seems
Spawn,
like she kind of passes on in her mother's arms.
But Spawn real is, I really like this as like Spawn has been drawn to darkness, drawn to like evil, drawn to this kind of this vibe. I mean, we're going to say vibe so many times, but he is drawn there, and like we have not seen Clown in quite a while. So he recognizes this evil, and he says he realizes that this is Clown's work. And I think that like what Bendis and Wood are doing is they're trying to like kind of keep you off kilter a little bit, because even Spawn's caught a little off guard by Clown kind of returning, and Clown's already like on to the next thing, but Spawn is hunting him essentially.
This next 2-page sequence that we took our little bit from at the beginning,
Oh boy.
It's my favorite sequence in the comic, not necessarily because of what it says, because again, there's going to be a heavy trigger warning. It's my favorite artistic sequence in the book. My favorite of Ashley Wood's work in the book. What's happening in this sequence is that Clown is essentially materializing in the darkness of a porno theater behind this like creepy looking guy who's got this like obviously delighted look on his face. Okay. And we keep coming back to the same image of that guy's face. I really love the cartooning of his face is what makes this. And I also love how Clown looks set in the darkness behind him, where you can just barely see his features. Here is a place where the storytelling, the narrative, and the kind of abstract dreamlike quality really all come together to work for me. Intercut between the panels are close-ups on people's faces. It looks like people kissing. You don't see anything too like graphic, but you can tell what he's watching.
Yeah.
And Clown, who is kind of hovering behind him, is just going on in graphic detail about the sad circumstances that led to the actress or one of the actresses on screen being coerced into adult films.
Yeah.
Including sexual assault and trauma with her family. long story short, Clown's game here is that this guy unknowingly is watching a film of his own daughter.
Yeah.
And the sequence where Clown kind of hits the punchline with him, the language through all this is extremely graphic. I'm not going to describe everything he says. Be warned if you read this. I cannot put a heavy enough trigger warning on descriptions of abuse, sexual abuse, and self-harm. Just be warned. But the sequence artistically here where Clown kind of fades in from the darkness and he's saying to the guy like these horrible things and he's like hitting the punchline, and the guy who's been in shadow the whole time, the color drains from his face. It's a very Guy Davis kind of look through like the whole thing here. Just that last panel of Clown's face faded in, the abstract way it's rendered with his weird jagged teeth being the only thing you can kind of see, and this guy's face being so pale. I love it.
And I also like we've mostly seen this guy have one expression for like kind of like 2 pages
of like kind of twisted delight.
Yeah, and then it changes, and then he kind of goes like slack, like it becomes blank, and we see
just blank disgust.
Yeah, but we also see what Clown has driven him to, which is another instance of self-harm in this book.
Yeah,
it's a lot. And you know what? For the return of Clown, this like puts Clown on a level like, yeah, he was like ripping the hearts out of mafia bosses when we first met him.
It was creepy.
This is
my favorite thing. Clown is my favorite thing about this comic.
Yeah, he gets much cooler looking soon.
We see another look at Clown here, and he kind of looks more like a painting of a hobo clown in a way, like that you see at a gas station, like a sad clown, where like he almost could have a like little hat with a like droopy flower or something like that. It's a very more jokery in a way. Ashley Wood here, by the way, is rendering all of this in like black and white and sepia tone and shades around that.
All of it looks like he spilled his coffee on his pages.
He might have used coffee for this. It does look like an ink wash of some kind. And, you know, that's not an unheard of technique. But yes, it's all very abstract. And we get back to Fassbender and Hertz talking. And Hertz says he knows that Genghis Khan is still around today. We get this cool shot of, I guess, Clown's eyes. Or are those Spawn? No, those are Spawn's eyes.
I think it's
those are Spawn's eyes, yes. Because they're talking about Genghis Khan. And as we turn the page, we get another pretty sick Ashley Wood rendering of Spawn, where he's got like huge, totally nonsensical guns and like chains with hooks hanging off of him. And he's like, I do enjoy the art in this comic.
It's got like a very cool, like it's like kind of blown out in places, like the highlights are all blown out. It feels like the kind of thing that I would have been 12 or 11 when this came out. It kind of feels dangerous in a way that like the main Spawn comic does not feel. It feels more adult. I described this to Vanessa. I was like, oh, I got to talk about Hellspawn. She's like, oh, what's that? I was like, it's exactly the kind of book that is like kind of grotesque and violent in a way that like a 15-year-old is like, this is the most adult shit ever. I'm an adult. I'm like ready for this. And it's interesting too, because this feels like Bendis getting the demons out a little bit. Ultimate Spider-Man starts right around the time of this book. Like these books are coming out at the same time. And it's understandable that he would leave.
Well, he had already been doing like some violent crime stories.
True.
Torso, I think, was before this.
I think that people forget,
maybe slightly after.
I think that people forget that that's his root, is like crime noir, and like that stuff's disgust. It's like gross, right? Like when a crime story, a noir story, is like really good, it really does reveal this like dark underbelly, and I think that that's
there's
really
a seediness
cool.
to it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that with Ashley Wood on board, it's understandable why so many Spawn fans like love Ashley Wood's art. It's hard because one, it's also the kind of art that makes you, as a comics fan, be like, oh, I like real art. You know what I mean? Like it's elevated to a certain level where it's like, oh, if you don't like it, you just don't get it, kind of thing.
And the thing is,
I don't get it. So,
well,
no, I'm kidding.
I said it's my least favorite kind of comic, and I keep coming back to that because my least favorite kind of comic is just very abstract. The more we dig into this and the more analysis we give it, as often is the case, the story is coming more easily to the surface. And I realize, and I want to reiterate again, I don't dislike either component really of what's happening here.
Mhm.
The dialogue that Bendis is doing or the renderings of Ashley Wood. And I don't think that if Bendis was doing a more straightforward kind of script over Ashley Wood's art, that would be better or work more. I think maybe if Bendis's dialogue was over more straightforward art, it would be easier to read the story in some ways. But really, when I think about it and when we talk about it, I don't think that would necessarily be better for the story as a whole, in the sense that it would take away from what I think they're trying to accomplish here.
Well, I would argue that what we see from his Avengers work a few years later is exactly what you're talking about. When you pair the quick-witted, snippy-snappy dialogue of a Bendis comic and you just apply it to the Avengers, then
you got
it's
Spider-Man and Luke Cage going back and forth about their booties,
right, and like
their socks or whatever,
and but you just have 8 panels of like headshots, and it's not always the best,
No, it wore on. It wore on a little bit. I will say, while we're talking about it, Brian Bendis's Avengers, all of it, start to finish, kind of really weighed heavily on the artist. David Finch was a great pairing for those early New Avengers issues because it made them feel so super heroic and really carried that vibe as Bendis was kind of learning the ropes of doing a team like that. And then you had guys like Lionel Yu. His New Avengers was so killer. I loved it so much, where I don't know if he had an inker on that. I think it was just colors over pencils. I could be wrong. And then you had Stuart Immonen at one point.
Oh, incredible.
All just so good. And then you had other guys too, like Billy Tan, who had a long stretch on New Avengers.
Steve McNiven.
Steve McNiven, another great artist. Yeah, like you can see where the lulls are. No offense to Billy Tan, but like he's no fucking Stuart Immonen.
Yeah. And the thing is too, Stuart Immonen wasn't even Stuart Immonen yet, and he was still incredible.
Well, he was at that point. Do you remember, have you ever read or seen the one-page origin stories from Action Comics and Superman or whatever that Stuart Immonen did in the style of Winsor McKay for like all of Superman's villains?
I haven't, but I'm a little Nemo head.
Oh, we love Little Nemo.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorites of all time. One of my votes. And it is certainly also very problematic if you get into it, because it's from like 1913 or some shit.
Not co-signing the ideas within it. No. Just saying that some of the art looks very cool.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Incredible storytelling in that, because that was some of the foundational like Art Nouveau storytelling. Anyway, all that to say, there's a long legacy of like people experimenting with art and how we're visually following stories, to bring it back again to talking about Ashley Wood. Even those Winsor McKay pages, those one sheets, are like just incredible works of like multi-textured art that a comic artist today just doesn't do that.
Yeah,
like it's
absolutely.
And so here we have Ashley Wood catching up Spawn and Clown here. And this is my other favorite portion of the book. Spawn shows up with his guns, and Clown shows up, and his horrid, jagged teeth and his long fingers. He's like, God damn it, Alpo, what's it been? Feels like 5 years or something, Alpo. Time flies when you're oops, well, you know. And he says, I love this. He says, what you been up to? No, wait, I know. And he puts his hand over his face like Dracula, and he goes, Wanda, which is just such a great bit. And again, the cartooning and art here is so solid
Really
and
fun.
so interesting and so much fun.
Really like how Clown's face becomes this sort of like reflection of Spawn. You know, where he's got his
Yeah.
hands out and he's kind of got like a Spawn eye going on, because they are both, you know, worked for Malbolgia, you know. So
Here's where things get very abstract visually and in terms of the storytelling.
I like this double page spread.
I do too. It's like essentially Clown getting blasted away. There's a huge sketchy bat. We see Spawn's eyes. We see Clown's jagged hand. Ashley Wood's rendering of Spawn's cape on the bottom right,
So cool.
where it's just like all tendrils. It's great. He says, and Clown says, "Nice try, Al. Well, you sure took care of me, but what about them? You think you brought enough badass for everybody?" And we get another double page spread, which Bendis loves. Bendis has always been a huge user of double page spreads. Of Spawn hunkered over with Angela and Overkill and Cygor and the Freak. And this is one of the more Spawnish pages here.
There's a part of me that is like, man, I kind of wish that the whole comic looked exactly like that. But then at the same time, you know, you mentioned that Bendis loves a double page spread. There's a reason, like whenever he does them, it's because it's a big moment. And we needed all this kind of smaller, kind of more vibesy moments leading up to this. This is like, if I'm picking this up and I'm like, Hellspawn #1, what is this? I get to this page, I'm like, oh, fuck yeah, hell yeah. They didn't forget about these guys, you know?
Hellspawn, yeah. So Spawn has knocked Clown's head off, basically.
It's pretty cool.
He says, Clown is still taunting him. He says, Spawn says, "Listen up, freak. You tell me what this is all about. What are you doing here? What are you doing to these people?" And this whole sequence, again, the more you dig into it, the cooler it becomes. Spawn all hunched over, looking like totally alien, with Clown's like spine and head all wrapped up in chains. His hand, like Spawn's hands coming out from the cuffs. It's just very interesting. And Clown says, his face comes through the chains, and he says, "Tell you what, Al, you're so scary, you're so smart, figure it out for yourself." And he disappears from the chains and leaves Spawn standing on a rooftop. This is just so
Looking
interesting.
like the most Batman he's ever looked, probably.
It's a very Tim Burton-y Batman almost.
This is
like
the kind
if
of stuff
Batman was in the world of The Nightmare Before Christmas somehow.
This makes me wonder, like, if they did an animated series in this style instead
I'd
of
watch
what
that
we
on HBO.
Right, it would be the craziest thing. It would throw you for such a loop. We brought up David Lynch already, but it would feel like the Eraserhead of superheroes, like truly.
The R-rated Spider-Verse type animation of like a Spider-Verse Ashley Wood kind of vibe. Mm-hmm. Man, this is really growing on me. What a cool comic when we can start out and I can say this is my least favorite kind of comic and mean it and still be finding cool things to like about it, though, and to like about this comic in particular, and to see how different it is from what was on the shelves at the time, especially, and honestly, what the hell's on the shelves now.
Totally. Yeah, this feels like that's why I really wanted to cover it, is because it's so interesting. And I think that Spawn, and as an extension, like Todd McFarlane, it like gets a weird rap of like, oh, it's just like old comics used to be. They're just to be thrown away, or worse, they're just to be slabbed up and put on a wall and never read. And like, oh, they're just collector's items. They don't matter. And it's like, no, there's stuff here. There's room to play. There's things to do. There's statements to make with these characters. You know, I joked about Bendis getting the demons out a little bit so that he'd go write Ultimate Spider-Man. does feel a little bit like that, because Spider-Man, especially with Mark Bagley on art, like, is the opposite of this.
Oh, totally
It's
opposite.
it is so far away from this. And if you gave this to a comics reader, if you gave this to anybody, gave them these two books, they would never guess that they were by the same person.
So the comment, yes, 100%. So the last page here is Fassbender and Hertz discussing Fassbender basically telling him there's a war on. Can't you feel the warriors all around us? There are 3 news channels who we haven't seen in the main Spawn comic in some time, but they can't cover everything. And Hertz says, what are the spoils? And Fassbender says, we are. And I love, again, this close up on Hertz's eye.
So cool. Very, very Twilight Zone kind of moment.
So that brings us to Hellspawn number 2. Pierce, slap me with those credits.
All right. Todd McFarlane and
channeling
Image
the
Comics.
Clown for a minute there.
Oh, yeah. Did you like my new clown voice?
It was good.
Thanks. Todd McFarlane, Image Comics present Hellspawn number 2, The Clown, Part 2. Story by Brian Michael Bendis, illustrated by Ashley Wood, cover by Ashley Wood, lettering by Richard Starkings, and Comic Crafts Oscar Gongora. One thing I'll note is that this one doesn't have a dedication, and I have to imagine it's because maybe Brian Michael Bendis was like, to his wife, was like, oh, I'll dedicate this one to you. And she read the first one, and she was like, I'm good.
You don't have to.
You don't have to do that.
This first page is a great rendering of Spawn with a big gun sitting against the skyline. There's like that spiral, like filigree texture over the page that kind of gives it that like cloudy, hazy look. And there is a private chat room log represented here between Hellspawn and Kalios, and they're talking about what happened with Mark of the Beast, and how he trapped Hellspawn, or trapped a Hellspawn using his pentagram, or so we thought. He wasn't actually trapped.
The only thing is that did not happen in New York.
Well, we don't know that these guys are in New York, Pierce. This is a private chat room. The World Wide Web is worldwide, baby.
No. But
that's why you log on.
They're saying the rumor is that this guy in New York actually held the Hellspawn in. But that story with Mark happened in Santa Monica.
Well, it's a rumor, so maybe that's
true. Game of Telephone changed it.
The Hellophone.
Nice.
Yeah. This guy named the Redeemer shows up and keeps saying the streets are paved in fear. Streets are paved in fear. They call him a slur, and he finally leaves. So actually Bendis was tapped into what the internet was like even then. Don't love that he printed the F slur, but at the same time, that's kind of very real. They're just talking about it, and they say they're not ready yet. Next page is this sequence of this guy being interviewed, talking about how if there was a diseased rat going into your child's bedroom, you wouldn't try to accommodate and change your life to make your life revolve around the rat. You would kill the rat and get it out. And the host says, by them, you mean the blacks, Jews, and gays, right? And the guy says, yes, of course. Says, yes. So he's like,
this is like a very
hardline provocateur.
This is like a very like William Stryker, God Loves Man Kills moment, right? That's kind of who this guy kind of gets set up to be. I think it works better than what we normally get as talking heads, but I like that it is like, again, the dark underbelly of the talking heads that we usually get.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's pretty dark. I hate
it because also it feels like a news report now.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so I will say this next sequence, this is what really started to wear on me. Okay, we meet a woman named Claire who's sitting and reading by a statue. Clown comes up. They have this conversation. She goes on this long, very like, I'm 15 and this is deep thing about how when you're a kid, you think your parents are God, and then God comes along and replaces the uncertainty of knowing your parents are human, and it's all just a lie. Now, here's the thing. I'm not a God person. That we've done religious traumography. It's very basic edgelord atheist.
Yeah.
And the cartooning and the drawing that goes with it is far more interesting than the like dogma level dialogue that's happening.
How
And
do you
it goes
feel
on
about the
for a long
usage
time.
of so many repeated panels, though?
Don't mind it in this case. It is a stylistic thing for Ashley Wood. I think he's building a mood.
Yeah.
I'm not really offended by it.
It is the sort of
that
Bendis thing that when you have a long running conversation, like people don't look that much different when they talk. So like save myself some work.
I think it's meant to make the different moments feel different. When we see Clown and his teeth are all jagged and weird across his whole mouth, and she's talking about his makeup, but we don't really see it. It's all very conceptual. I don't mind the conceptual, like almost cut and pasty art. The thing that gets to me a little bit artistically is a lot of these pages are just brown ink wash.
Yeah.
Like this sequence is just brown ink wash with a few repeated panels. They're talking about this. Clown says what's so this sequence goes on for 5-6 pages. And
easily.
I'm
It
not
might
going
even
to
be
get
longer
into
than that.
all of them. I'm not going to get into all of them because it's just this dialogue between them. It's almost like you said, it's like a very one-acty, like Waiting for Godot kind of dialogue where they are talking about their philosophy. And so Clown says, "What is the best thing you ever did in your life?" She says, "I saved a baby once. Mom was putting her groceries away. Kid was still in the cart. Cart started rolling the street and she didn't see it. I jumped out of my car and got to the baby just before it rolled into traffic. I saved that kid. That was a good thing." And Clown says, "Oh, that was so sweet. But Claire, what about when you were 14 and you smashed that little girl in the face with a rock because she wouldn't let you borrow her brush? She never fully healed, never did. That's a pretty bad thing, right?" And here's where she gets scared. I love this pullback panel of them sitting in the park.
Yeah, it's
Like
cool.
you get the full atmosphere. I like the like close up on Clown's disgusting fucking mouth and his like weird Nosferatu-esque appearance throughout these panels.
I like that he seems to sort of be morphing within this whole sequence, right? He doesn't
Yes.
even really look like he looked in the last issue. Now, I will say this, the beginning of the book sets up who Spawn and Clown are. Like if you like on the credits page, just like Spawn, he's Al Simmons, blah blah blah. Clown, he's a shape-shifting demon, blah blah blah. So like it wants you to sort of just buy in on those things to
And I
start,
am.
which is
I mean,
fine.
I'm totally bought in with Clown being kind of amorphous here, especially with what comes next, because he says, "I'll show you something you don't believe in, which is hell." And he starts to take his long, craggy Nosferatu fingernails and peel off his skin. Now, this 2-page sequence where it's a close up on the Clown face and you see the like jagged lines that kind of cut into his skin where the makeup kind of outline is.
Mm-hmm.
It shreds open with his fingers. This is like beating the second version, like the Skarsgård Pennywise to the punch by like 25 years or whatever the fuck it is. 20 years or something.
It's a really cool
And
sequence too, because we've seen Violator transformation sequences. At this point, the movie's already been out, so we've seen that Violator transformation sequence. And this is fucking cool. And
Ashley Wood is like, "Oh, I'm going to draw the gory part." Yeah.
yeah.
I'm not going to know. None that's going to be there.
And we get a new look for Violator. That
is basically what if you asked Ashley Wood to design the original Violator.
It's like this, like almost like H.R. Giger, Cthulhu, Hellmouth demon.
Where he's got this huge long mouth that, much like Violator's huge long mouth, but his goes down, and like the new one goes down into his chest, and he's like coming up out of the dude's skin. This sequence, no complaints. The horror is fucking incredible. Ashley Wood is crushing it. The colors, the inks, everything he's doing on this page is just both of these pages is just spot on for me.
Yeah, and I actually really like Bendis writing clown on this next page.
I actually really do too.
It's so fun. He goes, okay, haha, now I know, ha ha ha. Now I know you can't hear me over the screaming, but you see that endless flaming tunnel you're falling through right now? Well, right after that is hell. Say hi to my publicist, huh?
I even like what he says before when he's okay. So also the other thing about his mouth is that it is not dark inside.
It
is like burning with illuminated, like boiling light. And he says, Claire, don't turn away. Don't hide your eyes from me. I want you to see something. Something you say can't be real. And she kind of dies of fright on the spot. It's pretty fucking terrifying. The whole sequence, the whole abstract, the perfect amount of abstraction on that page that you just quoted of her horrified face going into the pupil of her eye, into the darkness of this spiraling, twisted nothingness that then becomes the jagged maw of Clown's teeth, Violator's teeth, and she's laying there. Oh, it's so good.
It's kind of like how in Blade Runner we get like the close up of the eye that eventually like fades into what LA looks like.
And we've seen that same kind of thing from like Greg Capullo before. Mm-hmm. I think we've even seen Todd the God do something like that. So it is a very Spawn moment that I think really works.
This is definitely two creators who've read Spawn.
But I'm going to save that for my final thoughts, but we'll get into it.
Making Spawn in the way that they want to make it, not being too beholden. They're understanding the visual language and the stuff that they need to take, and then realizing like, okay, but what's like my twist on this? What's my yes anding, and like amping up the horror.
And I feel like I 100% agree 100%. And I feel like between first and second issue, there was maybe a note that was like, okay, maybe a little more storytelling.
Yeah.
Spawn shows up again and says, what are you doing to these people, Clown? Which that's really all he's done. He does exactly the same thing he did before. Shows up, Clown, we get this close up on his teeth by her ear. And then he says, oh, screw you, Al. And we get the barrel of Al's gun, the blast of the gun with the, and this panel of Spawn with his cape, like kind of weirdly spiraling around him.
That's the statue that I want.
Yeah.
There's a statue of that panel. That shit would be fucking.
Oh, yeah.
So
like the Batman black and white artist edition style. Like
100%.
That would be badass. I will say, Ashley Wood gives great Spawn. The Spawn that we're getting here, fucking great. It's kind of funny that the only thing he does in the narrative is show up and ask a question and shoot a gun. Classic Spawn stuff. The whole thing here where he's looking at Clown's like dead body on the ground with the headless body, and then the head, he starts to pull his head out and his head becomes Violator again. Just pulls another Violator out of the body. And he's, oh God, it's so good. The way he draws this very like H.R. Giger-esque, like fucking
I love this
Violator.
I love this Violator. That's another this statue of like Violator and Spawn double cheeked up on a
so good
Thursday afternoon.
Hell yeah, yes. He's been doing leg day. He got too big boot. Yes. And he says, I'm going to ask you one more time, why are you doing this? And Clown is literally teasing him. He's like, Al, what did you think was going to happen? Do you think you could just run around and do whatever you want? Al says, yes. And he just Spawn and Violator says, yeah, like fucking Skeletor. And Spawn says, I'm going to ask you one more time, why are you doing this? What do you want? And Violator, as he's being wrapped up in chains, says, to prevent you from tainting all the children, because they don't want you or anything you pretend to stand for. We get another double page spread here of Spawn blowing holes in new Violator as he's all wrapped in chains. As Violator says, they want to live in darkness. It's
cool.
I don't know. I think I might love these comics. I think I hated them when I started, and there are parts of them that, let me rephrase that. I didn't hate them when I started. I was a little exhausted by them when I started. And there are parts of them that I think are exhausting. trying to get into the story and the narrative with just the dialogue and some very abstract art to guide you is a big ask at first.
Mm-hmm.
By the end of this, I'm kind of sold. This last page, we get the kind of the Hellspawn version of the Talking Heads with two news anchors, and they're basically just saying terrible things like woman was found dead, a 92-year-old woman was assaulted, police report that transients, prostitutes, and drug addicts have been living in a dead woman's home. This reminds me that Mother's Day is right around the corner. What are you getting for your mother? And he says, it's a surprise. And they laugh. And then they say, on a lighter note, all hell broke loose on a taping of the Susie Booker show. Controversial religious leader, Reverend Gary Danes, was appearing on a panel about race relations. And they show the footage of basically just a terrible, like, what's the word I'm looking for?
A
Oh
brouhaha.
gosh, a brouhaha. No, a riot.
Yeah,
A violent riot breaks out because of the guy saying terrible things.
yeah, being
Man,
racist and
being
misogynistic, and
racist
homophobic.
and all that stuff. Yeah, and that's kind of where it ends. It says the Susie Booker announced that they will run the show in its entirety unedited in a 2-hour special.
To be continued.
That's that. I mean, okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and say my final thoughts because we kind of got into it a little bit. But to me, this is a very Spawn story being told by two creators who are trying to do something totally different with it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's Spawn and Clown, Spawn having to try and beat the devil at his own game somehow. It's very interesting.
I think, again, I kind of like love just kind of seeing the stuff that's happening on the outskirts of the main story. And I like that what Bendis and Wood are doing here is really bringing the darkness up to the surface. That, like, the events of the comic, the main Spawn title, yeah, like bad stuff's happening, but it's a superhero book. This is not a superhero book.
No, this is a horror book. And like, I will say it's very Spawn. Like I said before,
Mm-hmm.
Spawn kind of just shows up, asks questions, and shoots guns. It's kind of like if you only knew one thing about what Spawn does, it's probably that. But as you said, it's a totally different artistic bent. Like it's a totally different artistic vision. And yeah, it's growing on me. As often happens when we dig into these with like a real analysis, and I spend more than, the time it takes to read the issues, maybe even twice. When we dig into it and have that conversation, it's just one of those times where I've really learned a lot more about the comic I was reading because of how we discussed it. And that's the power of our podcast, listeners.
That's what it's all about. I guess final thoughts for me too. The first time I read this, I was like, "Oh no, what have I gotten us into?" Because
that's how I felt. I was like, "Oh boy, can't I read that Superman comic my roommate asked?"
I was just like, "Man, am I gonna just delve into the like heart of darkness kind of for kind of no reason here?" Because, like, I'll say this for myself personally. It's sometimes tough reading stuff like this. Like, it's tough reading, like, I'm, not to, like, there's a reason we put trigger warnings when we remember to do it, right? Because, like, this stuff is hard. It's hard to talk about. It's hard to, like, yeah, it's the real world, grow up. This stuff happens every day, but, like, I don't want it to happen every day. The news is unrelenting. The world we live in is on fire. It's a fucking nightmare. And so, to, like, after I get off of work, like, we listeners, we tend to, like, record after we're off of work, and, like, we just had work all day, which, whatever, my job is stupid and doesn't matter, but, like, I'm not relaxing by reading these comics. Like, I think sometimes when we've had a really positive reaction to Spawn specifically, it's because we read it and we go, "Oh, that was so fun. That was like such an escape from the rest of my day or the rest of my week or whatever it is. I can't wait to talk with my, one of my best friends about this." you read something like this and you just go, oh boy, I'm gonna have to like live here for like a little while. And that's tough. But I also think that's to the comics credit. I think it's doing its job, right? They are nailing exactly what they're going for, because
they're getting that vibe. There's that word again, but here's where it fits.
You don't really want to sit with this, but you also understand what the stakes are. I think that pushing it into a fight scene basically is what the second issue does. We see what happens when exactly what we were talking about in the first issue, where we're like, oh, it's kind of voiceover over kind of abstractions.
Yeah.
Whereas the second issue is very much the conversation for, you said 5 or 6 pages. It is 10 pages. 10 pages of the book are two people sitting next to each other having a conversation.
That part is a little tough, I will say.
Sure. And that's
growing pains, learning.
But then you get this like really incredible sequence between Spawn and this new clown. I love this clown design. I think it's so cool.
The new Violator is fucking great.
So cool. Yeah, new Violator is amazing. Like, and it also reminds you like Ashley Wood's not a one-trick pony, just doing like collage and like photo stuff. Dude can draw. Dude can like design characters.
There's a lot of intent here.
Yeah. And I am happy we're having the Summer of Hellspawn.
I'm glad that we're doing something different. I'm glad that we'll get to dig into something new. And I'm glad that we'll maybe learn a little bit about comics that we didn't have in our brains before.
Yeah. You know, the book that I think we've mentioned it before on the show, but like the book this does sort of remind me of in a way is Fell. You know, which we covered many years ago at this point, but like
I forgot about that. I got a copy of it, dude. Okay, that was written by Warren Ellis and drawn by Ben Templesmith, who we'll talk about later. Ben Templesmith was only 18 years old when he was doing Hellspawn, by the way.
Holy shit,
he's younger than me.
Oh my god,
yeah,
that's insane. Oh,
yeah,
I'm excited to talk about it then too.
Well, I got a copy of it. I borrowed a copy of it from a girl I was dating at the time. And I guess she loved it. She was the kind of person who, like, if she loved a book, she loved a book and would like love the hell out of a book. And it was a well-read copy. And I guess she had like rolled a joint on the cover of it or something at one point, and it had like a stain on it or something. And like, I took it to get Ben Templesmith to sign it. I took it to New York with me. And I was like, yeah, this girl I'm dating, she's one of her favorite comics. She just loves this so much. I was just hoping you'd sign this. And he looks at it and he goes, the fuck is wrong with this comic? The fuck did you get all over it? And what did she do with it? And I was like, I don't know. She read it, dude. Whatever. I was like, fine.
That's like when I met, as you know, I'm a big Darkhawk fan, and I met Danny Fingeroth, former Marvel editor and creator of Darkhawk, co-creator of Darkhawk, and he signed my copy of Darkhawk #1 with a ballpoint pen. Like, and I was kind of like, okay.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, then.
He also kind of like was like, why do you want to get this signed? And I was like, all right.
I love it.
All right, man.
Sorry. I love it. Sorry
that I love the Spider-Man of the 90s.
Yeah.
The Spider-Man for a new era.
Spider-Man. I will also say, I like living in darkness. Here's the thing. I don't like living in the real world's darkness. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't like living in the darkness of the real world, but I'm the kind of person that, like, part of the reason I fuck up with trigger warnings all the time is that, like, while I am pro trigger warning, sometimes my brain just goes like, okay, yep, we live in that fucking world.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I just go like, we live in a world where that happens.
It's not that I don't have a stomach for it. It's just that sometimes it's not where I want to be mentally.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, most people don't.
Yeah.
But I'm a sick, twisted motherfucker. No, I just honestly, it's a weird way. I've talked about this before, I think, but it's a way I blow off steam a lot of the time, to read about certain specific things that are really harrowing. I used to watch a lot of YouTube videos about caving disasters.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, but the big one, the thing is, when I'm in a really dark place, I will read something really brutally dark. One of my favorite books of all time, not my recommendation for this podcast, but maybe an unofficial one now, is The Indifferent Stars Above. Have you ever heard of that book? Do you know that book?
No.
It's considered one of, if not the definitive accounts of the Donner Party and going through the Donner Pass. And it is just one of the most brutally fucked up books. Just that sometimes I like to dwell in that, and sometimes maybe that's why I'm picking up on this more, is that like that horror is really coming through in that like kind of supernatural meets like very tethered and like grounded sadness.
It feels also a little bit like what's the director who does a lot of the cosmic horror? Panos,
Oh yeah.
who did Mandy,
Mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm.
Panos Cosmatos really has the perfect name for making
Yeah.
cosmic horror movies, but whatever. That similar kind of thing where like the thing that you're watching is like harrowing and like disturbing, but you kind of like it's okay, like you feel kind of like okay dwelling in it.
There's a okay, Reanimator is another great movie, cosmic horror, Stuart Gordon, From Beyond. Reanimator is one of the most like virulently just disgusting, bloody, gory movies. I'm the kind of person that like not long ago I put it on to watch dinner with my roommates, and they were like, "Are you fucking kidding? We're not going to watch Reanimator at dinner." And I'm like, "Oh, we're not? Oh, okay." Like there's a level of like cartoon, to borrow the name of the Amel and the Sniffers album, cartoon darkness, that really makes
Good record.
things good record, great band. That I can key into, that I can kind of channel those anxieties into. And in some ways, when it's fiction like this, confront a level of darkness that can't exist and will never exist, and to sort of like confront that amorphous darkness. And then also sometimes just to understand what humans are capable of surviving. You know what I'm saying? To understand what humans are capable of really pulling themselves through. There are a lot of stories like that I've read of just intense survival situations, and it kind of gives me some fuel to get through a lot of the time. So I don't know. I'm kind of just talking about whatever the fuck now. But
well, you know, we've had some thoughts about this book, and some people wrote in.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So here's some letters in the back
Great.
of Hellspawn #2. I'm kind of at a loss here. I just read Hellspawn twice, in fact. I will start by saying I love Ashley Wood and I think his work is awesome. I still read through the Spawn Blood and Shadows graphic novel now and then. The story itself, well, what really happened? I didn't even get the point of the issue other than introducing us to the clown and Spawn's new looks. So some of it was interesting and perhaps amusing. There certainly didn't seem to be anything happening that could be called an actual plot, and certainly nothing that makes me want to know what will happen next. Shouldn't the first segment of a story arc pull you in and make you want to know what's happening and how things will progress? It's strange because everything I've read from Bendis to date has been very story driven, and he does an awesome job creating mystery and interest. But this, I don't know, was Bendis trying to mesh with Ashley's art by being vague and unfocused? The story didn't have any direction, it just happened. This was sent in by Twisted Spine.
Twisted Spine!
The next letter. Now, Bendis responds to all of them kind of at once. So there's 3 letters. Next letter says, first of all, I don't know if this was the proper time to release Hellspawn. I'm so wrapped up in what's happening in Spawn that Hellspawn #1 would have to blow me away to get my mind off what I hope is the biggest event in the Spawn universe. So yeah, we're a little before 100. Urizen is still doing his thing. But I'll put aside Spawn for a minute. Hellspawn started off good. Abstract or not, the visuals kept you in tune with the worlds. It's not important who is saying it, but the mood it sets. I didn't mind it wasn't set anywhere. The illustrations that Wood made for the dialogue could be stronger toward the story. Instead, it felt like a pinup fest. The Fassbender and Hertz dialogue was intriguing. And then we get to Corey. It starts off good. Story. Then once again, it starts to lose me with the pictures. Maybe I'm just stupid, but the only reason I knew clowns did something to her was the text balloons, scary clown ones. Still no real story. It just ends with beginnings. The theater was typical schlock attempts at the shocking little girl porn star angle. I looked at the same picture over and over and didn't feel disturbed in the least. The clown spawn scene had its ups and downs. Alpo was very funny. Some of the visuals were stunning, especially the spread of Spawn cowering against the onslaught of his many enemies, but the action sequences didn't have much action. This is where I feel the problem is in this book. It doesn't ground itself anywhere. I can't get a location to base any empathy I might have with the characters. For example, Spawn standing on a brick stack. Is he on a building? Then just plain old parchment backgrounds. I just didn't feel like I was in a dream or in another realm. It was just pictures on paper. That one was sent in by Preacher. And the last
The
letter,
comic? I got to say something that triggered that in me.
Sure.
I feel like the way they're writing Spawn here is they know they're coming towards 100, so they have to keep it real vague.
Yeah.
And they don't know exactly what he can do right now. They don't know exactly what he's going to be able to do. It definitely feels like that really clicked with me in that letter is like, well, yeah, they're not really grounding this Spawn in any Spawn. They're grounding it in Clown because they have to keep Spawn very surface level.
Yeah.
With 100 coming up.
To not like contradict what's going on in the main book.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's always funny. It's like the thing that would, ironically, because of Bendis with New Avengers, well, if Wolverine's in the New Avengers, but he's also on the X-Men, how do we parse where he's supposed to be at any given moment? It's like, well, he's on the Avengers on Monday. He's on X-Men on Tuesday. You know, like that kind of thing. But yeah, I do think that's why it's a lot vaguer. And we saw already in the second issue that it kind of tightens up and gets a little bit more story driven. But it is still extremely clown focused. And like, it's like a character hanging out that we've like never met before. Right. Like,
a lot of that.
The last letter says, I loved Hellspawn. One of the key elements to Hellspawn is the abstractness of Ashley's art. I'm a big fan of both abstract art and writing. It leaves so much open to the imagination, and that's what reading is all about. To me, the abstract element just enhances the reading experience. Horror, that's what Hellspawn is. That's the impression I get from the first issue. I don't think anyone would argue Ashley is the definitive artistic choice within Todd McFarlane Productions, maybe even within the entire industry. That was a weird sentence. I do agree, however, there are few panels where you just can't make out a damn thing and you have no idea what you're looking at. Shouldn't the first segment of a story arc pull you in and make you want to know what's happening and how things will progress? Well, it did for me. It sucked me in and got me thinking, hey, what's going on? How does that tie in? What exactly was the point of this? It didn't start off with a bang. It began with a whimper. And in my experience, many of the best stories are like that.
Okay.
So we got 2 out of 3 were not super high on it.
Well, even the one that liked it was like, it was a really good whimper.
Yeah. So here's what Bendis had to say. He said, I'm really enjoying the conversation and debate over Hellspawn #1. I know they're honest and well thought out opinions, and any discussion is healthy. I'm happy for those who liked it or enjoyed being creeped out by it. For those who didn't dig it, that's okay. You can't please everyone. If you could, we would only need one comic, one really popular comic. But for those of you in the middle, on the fence, confused, or intrigued by the book, I'm happiest for you because I think we're going to win you over. It is obvious from the first page that Ashley and I aren't trying to make a standard comic book. We were hired by Todd to write a mature horror superhero monster comic, to create something that doesn't look like anything else on the shelf, and I think we succeeded.
Yeah.
From the first page, we tried to avoid any kind of standardized comic book language, but all the information you need is in the comic. All of it. You might have to stop and look, but it's all there. Ash isn't interested at all in spoon feeding you with establishing shots and such, and I support this. I really do. But that doesn't mean that there isn't another way to convey the information to you. I offer you this. Read it again. You already bought it. Instead of just breezing through it and tossing it in a bag, read it again. My favorite comics and albums are the ones in which you have to give a twice through. Give it another read and see if you aren't surprised by what you find. I'm also glad you stuck around for issue 2 because in it is one of my favorite monologues and by far some of the totally amazing paintings I have seen. I won't discuss the validity of Ash's art because I think some of the criticism is just silly. He's a true creative genius who is admired by his peers, and I'm lucky to be working with him. If you don't like his work, that is certainly your right, but some of the comments I've received say more about you than about Ashley. Comics are an art form with great room for diversity and growth, and Ash is pushing ahead. I don't want to comment on the plot of the book. The first issue of Hellspawn set up what will be a tapestry of characters, all of which will surprise you by as early as issue 4. This book is by far the most complicated book I'm writing. It takes a lot of research and darkness. I will answer any question you have that don't give away the plot or twists of future issues. Thank you so much for buying, especially those who wouldn't normally buy a Spawn comic. Brian Michael Bendis.
Gotta say, I actually really agree with his assessment of going back and reading it again and taking a lot of time with it, as we just did, because there were a lot of things that stood out to me as like, okay, I'm getting a little more of this time.
Yeah, for me, this is the third read through to do it with you on the show, and or fourth read through, because I've read it a couple times already, and I wasn't really moved by it similarly, like to what you were saying earlier. But to dig into it and to really analyze it, it is like that record by that band that you're like, something about it, and then it ends up being your favorite record because
something about it clicks with you. Something in there, it hits. So overall, pretty good.
But not to be outdone, Todd has something to say.
Okay.
This is probably a good time for me to weigh in and give answers not only in this letter column, but in future ones to come. I didn't do an editorial in Hellspawn #1 on the rhyme or reason for the comic book's existence. I probably underplayed the event of the team that is on this book, and I know at times it may have been disappointing to both Brian and Ashley that I didn't fully push the book right out of the gate and make a big splash with it. My intent from the beginning was to have a book that came out, sold modestly, with a big commercial brand name stuck to it, you won't be stuck in it, hidden in a sea of other books. The debate will go on as to whether one form is better, the Capullo look or the Ashley look. As for right now, both of these accomplished artists are doing exactly what I want them to do, which is not to duplicate each other. With that said, I agree with Brian. They were hired to bring a look that was distinct and unique in and of itself. I agree they did bring that to these pages, and now it is a matter of nurturing and fostering it to see how many people are in tune with the sophisticated storytelling as compared to a normal superhero book. The art in regular comic books has a lot of big, ballsy pictures tied in with scantily clad women running around. Brian Bendis' strengths have always been far greater when you don't isolate any one of his issues, but instead take a look at the full body of work that comprises the story. If you take a look at Sam and Twitch, that was 8 full issues before he finished the Udaku storyline. The same with Jinx and Torso. No single issue jumps out at you. It's a story arc of the whole thing that actually makes you stand up and say, here's a writer that is paying attention to a bigger theme. With that said, it doesn't mean we can't come back and improve and add a little bit more plot to each 22 to 24 page issue and improve the artwork. In all honesty, both Brian and Ashley will tell you that we have phone calls where we struggle to find the exact path of this book and improve it. We don't believe we've hit the perfect button yet. But if you like what you see so far, I can guarantee it'll only get better. It will be my mission to make this a slow burn that catches on with people looking for something a little bit different. When you get right down to it, there's nothing on the market that can match up to it as its peer. We've tapped into a new consumer mentality instead of taking the easy road and doing a knockoff of the original Spawn. Keep the letters coming, and I'll make sure I get to as many of them as possible. I appreciate all the comments, both good and bad. Todd McFarlane.
Yeah, no, I think that's dead on, and I think we can see that he's like a little more plot in the art, maybe in that second issue. But yeah, no, I am excited to see how this goes as we go on, because it was a pretty interesting opening arc.
Yeah, I think we're going to get to reevaluate all 6 issues that Bendis does, and then we've already covered a little bit of Steve Niles' work with Spawn. We're going to get to compare and contrast Steve Niles' work on the main Spawn book with kind of what he has to work with once he's given Hellspawn, right? He takes over the last 10, he actually writes more of Hellspawn than Bendis does because he writes 10 issues of it. So I think that'll be really interesting. I'm excited for the Summer of Hellspawn. And before we go, do you have any recommendations for our listeners?
Yeah, I sure do. I recommend listening to some John Prine. You're listening to John Prine?
Love John Prine.
Yeah, because you're smart.
Great. What song should I listen to?
I've been jamming on Sweet Revenge all week, which I know is kind of a classic. Everybody knows that one, but that one came up in my feed and got me back listening. That one, and also In Spite of Ourselves was a duet. Do you know that song?
I don't know that I do.
It's a pretty good song. Look it up.
Great. I will.
There's also a great cover of that by the Viagra Boys with Amy Taylor of Emily and the Sniffers, in fact.
Hey, it all comes back around.
That's right.
My recommendation this week is, I think I'll do one of the more abstract ones, but I'll also throw in a normal one. The more abstract ones is like really like to prioritize moving around. And what I mean by that is, I think that I do it myself. I work from home. I sit at a desk all day. I don't know, go do like a physical activity. One thing as you get older, like you ran as fast as you could ever run and then you just didn't run again. So like sprint down the block or something. Just remember that you can do that. We don't get opportunities to do that as adults.
But my other advice.
But my other recommendation, just because I've been having a really great time with it, is Final Fantasy IX. It's so fun. It has nothing to do with Spawn, but it is really fun. I'm having a great time with it. I'm having all my nostalgia buttons are getting pushed by this new Magic set, so it's been very fun to revisit games and re-engage with games and characters that I love. So this is the recommendation is not specifically Final Fantasy IX, but it is re-engage with the thing that you used to really like that you don't engage with normally, right? Like I had not played Final Fantasy IX since I was probably like 15, and so hits different 21 years later.
That's true.
Yeah, I think much like our podcast, it's fun to come at things with new eyes and new experiences behind them, right? So
absolutely
great. Well, that's all for this one. Summer of Hellspawn has begun. George, I have one last thing to say to you. For Tonsil of the world,
he gave his only begotten spawn.
See you later, Hellspawn.
Spawnography!
Spawnography is recorded in Athens, Georgia, and Queens, New York. It's produced by me, Pierce Lyden. Our theme music and logo were composed by George Marston. Episodes come out every Monday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. If you like the show, please rate, review, subscribe. You can find us on social media at Spawnography or at SpawnographyPod. If you'd like to reach out to us directly, you can do so at spawnographypod@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, and until next time, see you later, Hellspawn.